Snow drifted across the yard in thin silver threads, the kind that hid sound but not breath. Frost clung to every fence post, every boot buckle, every man's eyelashes. A guard's whistle split the stillness sharp as the crack of glass. Caption Stalag 13, B. Bavaria, January 1945. A line of prisoners stood shoulder to shoulder, their coats the color of old dust. At the far end, a German sergeant gestured toward a stalled army truck, its hood up, steam sighing from the radiator like an animal in pain. Kruger's gloved hand jabbed the air. "Mechaniker, fix it." Reeves, the American mechanic, lifted his eyes. His face was cut by cold and hunger, but his hands, those still, looked like they remembered work. Lewis, another prisoner beside him, muttered, "You'd fix the enemy's machine." Reeves didn't answer right away. He looked at the truck, then at the guard, then down at the frozen mud between his boots. "I'll fix what's in front of me," he said. A few men snorted under their breath. One spat ice chips from the corner of his mouth. Reeves stepped forward. The guard shoved a metal box toward him. Tools, stamped Krupp 1944, the steel marked with the enemy's crest. The box hit the ground, the clang echoing across the compound. The sound felt wrong, too sharp, too proud. Reeves bent slowly, fingers shaking, and lifted a wrench from the box. The metal burned his palm with its chill. For a moment, he nearly dropped it. Then he tightened his grip. He crouched by the truck's open hood. Steam ghosted his face, and the smell of burnt oil reached deep into Memory, Ohio, a summer shop, his father saying, "Don't fight the bolt, son. Listen to it." Kruger loomed over him. "Hurry!" Reeves didn't look up. "Engines don't rush," he said quietly. The German frowned, not sure he'd heard right. Reeves unlatched the fan belt, checked the plugs by touch. The men in the line watched, breath pooling white before them. Lewis whispered, "He's really doing it." "What else can he do?" Someone answered, not that another said. Reeves wiped his hand on his sleeve and kept moving. The wrench slipped once and clanged again, echoing off concrete. A guard raised his rifle, then lowered it when Kruger shook his head. A low growl came from the truck's throat, half cough, half protest. Reeves listened, then shut the hood halfway and leaned in. He tapped the carburetor with the wrench, once-twice a rhythm learned from habit. The engine gave a reluctant gasp, then silence again. Reeves backed off, waiting. His breath hung before him like a cloud too tired to drift. Behind him, the prisoners shifted, the sound of their boots grinding frost like distant waves. One murmured, "He's fixing the thing that keeps them moving." Another answered, "Maybe he's fixing us too." Reeves didn't hear. His world had shrunk to gears and frost, and the way metal remembers touch. He turned once more to the box of tools. The wrench slipped in his grasp, clattering to the ground. Every eye in the yard followed the sound. He bent slow, deliberate, and picked it up again. The cold bit harder this time, the sting running up through his arm, but he held on. Snow kept falling soft as ash, covering footprints as soon as they appeared. Kruger's voice came again, quieter now. "Mechaniker, good. Tomorrow again." Reeves met his eyes for the first time. No salute, no nod. Just a man staring at another man across the narrow bridge of duty. He turned back toward the truck, the wrench steady in his hand. The yard held its breath, waiting to see what mercy looked like in metal and frost. Snow thickened overnight, smoothing the scars of footprints across the yard. Morning light glowed pale against the tin roofs, and the air rang with the thin cough of engines trying to wake. Kruger trudged through the drifts, a shadow against the white, a heavy toolbox banging at his knee. He stopped beside Reeves and let it fall. The box struck the ground with a hollow thud. On its lid, the letters were stamped deep and proud, Krupp 1944. "Do your best," Kruger said, his voice flat, almost tired. Reeves knelt. The steel clasp bit his fingers as he opened the box. Inside lay wrenches and pliers, every handle etched with the same mark of the enemy. For a heartbeat he hesitated, the memory of American tools, smooth wood, clean, grease flashing behind his eyes. Then he reached in and chose one, a short wrench, its head worn shiny where countless German hands had used it. Lewis shuffled closer, breath fogging the air. "Your best for them." Reeves didn't look up. "For what I am," he said. He slid beneath the truck, snow melting into his collar. The undercarriage smelled of iron and frozen oil. He set the wrench to a bolt and turned slowly, each movement stiff from cold. Metal groaned, complaining but obeying. Around him the camp moved in muffled rhythm, boots, orders, chains. A Red Cross flag flapped faintly over the infirmary, colors dulled by frost. Somewhere a kettle whistled, then fell silent. He worked with what he had: a strip of tin from a ration can twisted tight for a gasket, a spoon handle bent into a spacer. Pieces of enemy steel and prisoner scrap met beneath his hands, both unwilling and necessary. Kruger crouched nearby, arms crossed. "You were a mechanic before." "Still am, apparently. For us now. For the engine. It doesn't care who feeds it oil." The German studied him, then grunted something that might have been agreement. Above them, the sky rumbled. A low vibration rolled across the camp, the sound of bombers far away, but close enough to bend the air. Every man froze for an instant, faces tilted upward, measuring distance by instinct. Reeves waited, wrench poised, until the hum faded eastward. Then he breathed again and tightened the next bolt. Lewis's voice drifted from the shadows. "You think they know we're down here?" "Doesn't matter," Reeves answered. "We still got to make things run." He tapped the carburetor, listening for tone. "Not right yet." He adjusted the choke, replaced a cracked hose with the sleeve of his own coat. Each act was small, almost invisible, but deliberate, like prayer spoken through work. Kruger handed him a rag. "You work clean American." Why? Reeves wiped his hands. Because dirt was never the enemy. The guard frowned, uncertain if he'd been insulted or honored. Snow hissed softly against the hood as Reeves leaned closer, the breath of the machine faint under his fingertips. He turned the crank. The engine coughed once, twice, then went silent again. He waited, listening to the echo in the metal. It was like a pulse that refused to find its rhythm. Behind him, Lewis murmured, "Would you serve the man who locked you up?" No one answered. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment. Reeves rested the wrench on his knee, eyes fixed on the dull gleam of the engine. He could see his reflection warped across its surface, thin-tired, but still human. He reached out again, tightening one last bolt until it sang. The engine shuddered beneath his hand, coughed once more, and refused to breathe. Snow kept falling, burying the toolbox a little deeper. The Mark Krupp 1944 vanished under the white, but the question it carried stayed bright and sharp in the air. Night pressed low over the camp, the kind of darkness that hummed with its own cold. Inside the small workshop, a single lamp burned yellow and unsteady. Its glow caught the floating dust, the curls of oil smoke that rose from the truck's open hood. The engine sat like a wounded thing, its parts gleaming dully under the soot. Reeves stood alone for a long while, rubbing his hands together for warmth. His breath fogged the metal, leaving faint circles on the valve cover. The others had gone back to the barracks. Only Kruger lingered near the door, arms folded, watching. The American bent and traced a finger through the grime on the floor, drawing lines, rough sketches of pistons, valves, timing chains. The drawings grew, spreading like a small city of thought across the concrete. He took a splinter of metal and used it as chalk, labeling each shape with the blocky German letters he'd seen stamped on the tools: Zylinder Kolben Kette. Words he shouldn't know, but did. Kruger stepped closer. The boards creaked under his boots. "You were an engineer," he said. Reeves smiled faintly, not looking up. "Just a man who fixes what he broke." The German frowned. "You mean your country?" Reeves shook his head. "I mean everything." The guard hesitated, then crouched beside him. For the first time, they shared the same space, shoulder to shoulder, the same lamplight washing their faces in gold. Kruger pointed at one of the sketched cylinders. "That intake." "Pressure here." Reeves nodded. "And the valve's too tight. You let it breathe, it runs smoother." The German hesitated, then picked up a bit of chalky dust and drew his own line parallel to Reeves's. Their fingers brushed as he did. Neither pulled away. They worked in silence after that, two shadows bending over the same pattern. The hum of the lamp filled the room, the only sound besides the slow drip of melted snow from the roof. Reeves wiped his hands on a rag that used to be part of a Red Cross sack. "You ever think about what happens when it runs again?" Kruger didn't answer immediately. "It must run. Orders, even if it takes a man's freedom with it." The German's eyes narrowed. "Freedom. We both have orders. Amerikaner." Reeves sighed. Maybe the orders aren't the point. Maybe the work is. He turned back to the engine. Kruger's reflection wavered on the metal like a ghost caught between worlds. For a moment, Reeves saw himself there too. Two faces blurred into one by heat and light. He reached for a wrench, the same enemy tool, and began to loosen the manifold bolts with slow, even turns. Each sound was measured the tick of duty against conscience. Kruger held the lamp lower, steadying the beam. The two men leaned close breath, mixing in the cold air. Steam rose from the block, carrying the faint smell of oil and iron. It filled the space like a low hymn. For the first time, Reeves spoke softly, almost to himself. Funny thing about engines. They don't care who's right. They just need patience. Kruger glanced at him, and something in his face shifted recognition, maybe pity, maybe respect. He didn't answer. Instead, he took the wrench when Reeves offered it and turned one bolt himself, slow, careful, exact. Outside, the wind thudded against the shutters, scattering ash and snow. The lamp flickered once, then steadied. In that trembling light, their hands looked the same cracked, grimy human. The truck sat waiting, silent but expectant. Reeves rolled his shoulders, wiped the grime from his palms, and whispered, "Tomorrow we see if it still remembers how to breathe." Kruger nodded once, eyes still on the machine. And when they finally stepped back from the workbench, the lines drawn in dust glimmered faintly like a shared map of something neither had meant to build. At dawn they would test Kruger's engine with a POW's hands. Morning broke hard and blue light slicing through the camp fences like cold glass. The air smelled of iron and frost. The yard had been cleared for inspection. Boots lined in rows, rifles glinting, breath fogging like smoke. Every prisoner stood, silent eyes fixed on the truck that sat in the middle of it all. Kruger's truck, the one Reeves had worked on for 3 long days. The engine hood was open, the tools stacked neatly on the fender. Reeves stood beside them, coat-torn hands black with oil that no soap could lift. Across from him, Kruger's jaw tightened as officers approached, 2 of them in long gray coats, their medals tapping softly against buttons. "So this is the mechanic," one officer said, his German crisp, the kind that cut more than it spoke. "A prisoner of war?" Yes, Herr Hauptmann." Kruger's voice stayed low. The officer leaned closer to Reeves. "And you think it runs now?" Reeves looked at the truck, not the man. "It'll run." A pause. The officer's breath hung in front of him, white and curling. He could have sabotaged it. Kruger's answer came quick like a reflex. He did not. The officer raised an eyebrow. "You trust him?" "I trust the work." The yard went still. Somewhere beyond the fence a dog barked, the sound distant, lonely. Kruger stepped forward, motioned for Reeves. "Start it." Reeves moved to the front of the truck. The crank was cold in his hands. He rolled his shoulders, once glanced up at the sky. No prayer, just breath, and turned. The metal resisted at first, groaning like an old man waking from bad sleep. Then came a cough, another, a low growl deep inside the engine. Steam hissed through a crack in the hood. Reeves turned the crank again, harder. The machine caught. A burst of sound filled the yard, thick and living. The enemy's engine ran steady, real, almost proud. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the officer took a step closer, disbelief wrinkling his brow. The sound rolled over the yard, drowning the wind. The guards, even the creak of boots. It wasn't noise anymore. It was something cleaner, something like breath. Reeves stood still, the wrench hanging at his side. Kruger's eyes met his across the hood. "You could have broken it," Kruger said quietly. Reeves nodded once. "Breaking ain't the only way to win." The officer snapped, "Enough. Shut it down." But Kruger didn't move. Neither did Reeves. The truck kept idling, smooth as heartbeat, steam rising in white plumes. The sound filled every corner of the camp until even the guards stopped pretending not to listen. Something passed through the line of prisoners, a quiet they hadn't known in months. They stood straighter, shoulders eased. One man wiped his nose on his sleeve and smiled without meaning to. The roar had become more than metal. It was dignity, shaking the frost loose from the wire. Kruger finally leaned in, turned the key, and the engine sputtered once before dying. The sudden silence felt enormous. The officer made a note on his pad, barked an order, and walked away. but the sound lingered an echo under skin, a hum in the bones of every man who'd heard it. Kruger set the wrench back on the fender. "You fixed more than the truck today," he said quietly. Reeves wiped his hands, leaving dark streaks like signatures on the snow. Maybe just gave it a reason to start. Steam rose one last time from the radiator, curling upward until it mixed with the falling flakes. The prisoners exhaled together, a slow breath that seemed to warm the air. For 1 second, no orders, no borders, no ranks. Captor and captive shared the same breath. That evening, the yard was almost quiet. The snow had softened underfoot, and the faint hum of the engine still hung in the air like a low hymn that refused to fade. Beside the mess hall, Kruger's truck idled steady, its exhaust weaving pale ribbons into the darkening sky. Reeves sat on a wooden crate, hands cupped to the small fire in a barrel. The heat barely reached his fingers. He watched the steady rhythm of the truck's pistons through the exhaust haze, an odd sort of peace, like a metronome, keeping time in a place that had none. Bootsteps crunched behind him. Kruger approached, holding 2 tin cups that steamed in the cold. He stopped beside the crate, set 1 cup down within Reeves's reach. "No orders," Kruger said. "Just coffee." Reeves looked at the cup. The steam smelled faintly of barley and burnt chicory, the kind of coffee no one pretended was good. He nodded once, slow. "Guess even engines need forgiveness." Kruger gave a short laugh, one that sounded almost human. "And men," Reeves blew across the rim of the cup. "We take longer to start." They drank in silence. The wind pushed snow through the open doorway, and the light from the fire caught the rising steam, turning it gold. From beyond the wire fence came low murmurs, the other prisoners watching through frost-bitten gaps, their faces half hidden in the dark. No one spoke loudly, but every man seemed to be listening. A young soldier near the gate whispered to another, "Why's he sitting with him?" "Because the truck's running," came the answer. "Maybe Mercy runs too." Reeves felt their eyes but didn't turn. He simply held the cup between his palms, letting the warmth soak through. The tin was dented at its rim, jagged, another kind of scar that still worked. Kruger stared into his own cup. "Tomorrow they send me east, another post. So soon, orders travel faster than gratitude." Reeves nodded. "Guess that's how engines work. One part moves the rest, follows whether it wants to or not." For a while, neither spoke. The sound of the idling motor filled the space between them. It was steady, dependable, alive, a machine that didn't know who it served anymore. Kruger stood, brushed snow from his coat, and said quietly, "You could have broken it. You didn't. I won't forget that." "Wasn't about you," Reeves said. "Was about not letting rust win." Kruger smiled faintly, saluted without ceremony, and walked into the darkness. Reeves watched until the footsteps faded. The truck's exhaust puffed softly, a faithful rhythm. The light from the mess hall window flickered across the hood, catching the grease-blackened wrench he'd left there. He lifted the tin cup once more, the metal warm now from both hands and memory. Across the fence the men still watched, saying nothing. A few raised their own cups in the cold, a quiet toast across barbed wire. Above them the smoke and snow twisted together, rising like a chapel hymn with no words. The night carried it upward out of the camp, past the searchlights, into the endless dark. And beneath that hymn the truck kept running after the orders stopped. The museum smelled faintly of wax and quiet. 40 years had passed, but the light in the Smithsonian Hall of Service still struck the glass displays like a slow dawn. Veterans and families moved in soft murmurs through the rose uniforms behind glass letters under lamps, pieces of the war arranged like prayers that could finally rest. At the far end stood a small exhibit, almost easy to miss. A single steel engine plate edges worn smooth letters stamped faintly, Krupp 1944. Below it a placard read, "Engine plate Stalag 13, B 1945, repaired in captivity using enemy tools by POW Robert Bob Reeves." Visitors paused without knowing why. Maybe it was the sound, the faint hum of the air system that seemed to echo the rhythm of an idling truck. Maybe it was the idea of something broken remade by hands that refused to hate. Near the railing an old man with a cane stopped. His coat was military gray, his breath shallow but steady. The reflection in the glass showed his lined face beside the photograph of a younger man, Reeves, standing beside a truck, A wrench in hand, snow caught in his hair. The old man raised one gloved hand and pressed it lightly to the glass. "You kept your word, mechaniker," he whispered. A young woman nearby glanced over. "Did you know him, sir?" He smiled faintly. "I was there when it ran." She looked at the plaque again, then at him. "You mean you were—" "Yes," he said quietly. "The other man. The one who asked him to fix it." The woman didn't speak after that. She just stood beside him, both of them watching the plate gleam under the museum light. Behind them, two veterans paused, removing their caps. A family followed suit. No ceremony, no music, just the small collective stillness that sometimes passes for reverence. The old man traced the etched name once more with his fingertip. The metal was cool, smooth, unyielding. His reflection merged completely with the photograph so that for a breath it looked as if captor and captive shared the same face. A museum guide passed by, straightening the ropes, then smiled at the old man. "He rebuilt that engine with almost nothing, you know." The old man nodded. "He rebuilt more than that." He let his hand drop, leaned on his cane, and whispered as he turned away. "He rebuilt mercy with a wrench." The words hung in the air, quiet as steam rising from cold metal. The crowd thinned. The lights dimmed for closing hour. In the display case, the reflection of the ceiling lights trembled across the steel like the shimmer of breath on frost. Somewhere deep in that silence it felt as if an engine idled slow, patient, endless. Peace idled on.